In the box office hit Inception, the protagonists attempt to plant an idea into a businessman's mind to persuade him to break up his company. To do this, they perform an inception, entering his subconscious during his dreams. This movie is undoubtedly science fiction, and the idea that someone's memories could be altered subconsciously is totally ridiculous. Or is it? Today on Nudge, I explore the evidence behind implanted memories. I chat with a world-leading memory expert, and I look back on possibly the strangest cultural phenomenon in American history.
I'm Charan Ranganath. I'm a professor at the Center for Neuroscience in the Department of Psychology at the University of California at Davis.
Charan has just written a best-selling book on memory.
I'm author of the book Why We Remember, available worldwide now.
In the book, Charan talks about false memories. Specifically, he shares an example from the 1980s.
The story of Michelle Remembers is kind of a fascinating one. In the 1980s in the U.S., we experienced something called the Satanic Panic, where basically there were just tons of news stories about people who claimed that they were part of these conspiracies where satanic cults were committing different kinds of abuse of people.
Connected to devil worship. That's the focus tonight of Lonnie Lardner's special report on Satanism. But we want to warn you now that some things you're about to see and hear might be too graphic for children.
Well, Terry, authorities tell us that the most serious or perhaps the most dangerous kind of devil worship comes in the form of underground cults. Most of them are very secretive, usually organizing clandestine rituals in the dark of night.
And Michelle Remembers was a book that came out that really played a formative role in triggering the Satanic Panic.
The book was popular enough for Michelle Smith to appear on Oprah.
My next guest was used also in worshiping the devil, participated in human sacrifice rituals and cannibalism. She says her family has been involved in rituals for generations. She is currently in extensive therapy, suffers from multiple personality disorder, meaning she's blocked out many of the terrifying and painful memories of her childhood.
In the book, Michelle Smith and her therapist, Dr. Lawrence Pazder, explain how through therapy, Michelle revealed hidden memories stored deep within her brain. Using recovered memory therapy, Dr. Pazder helped Michelle unearth these memories of satanic rituals that she was forced to attend as a child, memories of abuse by the Church of Satan, memories of being tortured, locked in cages, sexually assaulted, witnessing human sacrifices and bathed in the blood of infants and adults. The book triggered a nationwide satanic panic.
The darkness of Satanism is spreading rapidly today, especially among young people.
I'm Gordon Coulter. Today it's my privilege to host this program on the area of satanic cults and how they impact our families, our children, and our communities.
Parents were sent instructional videos on how to deal with the satanic panic.
A sudden, bitterly antagonistic attitude towards family and religion. A drastic decline in academic performance, a reclusive behavior pattern, and listening exclusively to heavy metal rock music, almost to the point of addiction.
And the panic spread worldwide, even reaching Queensland, Australia.
Still, nothing could prepare him for what he saw in his sheep yards.
All these animals destroyed, and they were hacked and butchered and stabbed and bludgeoned, and I got a hell of a fright, really.
Much of this was inspired by the memories Michelle reported in her book.
But these memories that she had came out of a long series of sessions with her therapist, who she later married. So it gives you an idea of the ethics of this psychiatrist at that time. But you can ask yourself the question of, is this real? Well, by the end of the book, she's seeing Satan.
On page 259, Michelle writes how she saw Satan pick up a large wooden crucifix. She writes, during the course of the ceremony, he would whittle away at the carved statue of the crucified Christ until there was nothing left.
It's very clear that this didn't happen, right? At least many of us would assume that it didn't happen the way that she's remembering it.
But Michelle wasn't the only person to remember experiencing satanic ritual abuse at this time.
The dimensions of this phenomenon have become alarming.
In this metroplex, it's my estimate that there's approximately 40,000 practicing Satanist in the Metroplex.
Charan writes that recovered memory therapy led hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals to develop vivid memories of extreme satanic ritual abuse of which they had no memory before entering therapy.
So how does she create this rich memory for something and have it be significantly inaccurate? And the answer is it has to do with the way we all remember. Memory isn't just regurgitating the information that we've experienced. It's actually an act of imagination.
Memory is more imagination than recollection. Frederick Bartlett, a pioneering British memory researcher, first studied this in 1932. He asked British university students to read a Native American folktale called The War of the Ghosts. Now, young Brits in the 1930s knew next to nothing about Native American culture, so the book was full of unfamiliar concepts and names, stuff these British students would struggle to remember. Bartlett recorded their memory for the story in the immediate hours, days, weeks, and months later, noting how their memories subtly changed over time. Bartlett found that many of the participants reimagined some of the story elements to make it fit with Western norms. Canoes, for example, became boats. In the original story, a man is struck by something and later dies. Over time, one participant changed this to, he was wounded by an arrow and killed. Each time the participants recalled the story, they introduced more distortions, showing that memory isn't fixed, but constantly reimagined.
In the kind of therapy that was described in Michelle Remembers, the therapist would literally ask people to imagine how abuse events could have occurred. When people remember something, or even try to remember something, that will result in a new memory, so that effectively the act of remembering changes how we remember that event. So if you are in a therapy session with someone you trust and they're suggesting something that could have happened and you imagine it, now later on you come back and you have a memory, but it's not a memory for something you experienced. You have a true memory, but it's something that you imagine.
Bartlett first noted this back in 1932. He wrote, "Remembering is not the re-excitation of innumerable fixed, lifeless and fragmentary traces. It is an imaginative reconstruction."
And so what can happen is that people can have a very rich, vivid, emotionally intense memory for something that never happened.
A 1955 study by Henry Roediger and Kathleen McDermott proves this. In the study, participants were asked to remember the following words: fear, temper, hatred, fury, happy, enrage, emotion, rage, hate, mean, ire, mad, wrath, calm, fight. Now, without rewinding, what words do you recall seeing? Do you remember seeing the words fear and wrath? What about the word anger? See, participants in this study were just as likely to remember seeing and hearing the word anger as they were seeing and hearing the words fear and wrath. But the word anger doesn't appear in the original list. This finding, amongst others, started to prove that we could be susceptible to false memories. But Michelle Smith didn't misremember one small word, she reimagined an entire history. To understand how that can happen, we'll have to review the work of Elizabeth Loftus, starting with her notorious Lost in the Mall study.
Well, the classic study is one that is known in the literature as Lost in the Mall.
Chris is the subject of a false memory experiment. The Loftus researchers had several of his family members record in a journal some real events shared by the family. A false event, being lost in a shopping mall at the age of 5, was added to the journal, which Chris read and ultimately remembered as real.
About 4 out of 10 of the people who she studied had these very rich memories for things that she could show that they made up over these successive sessions.
I remember getting lost and I was crying, and I remember that day I was so scared I thought I'd never see my family again.
After they were told that they had remembered something falsely, many of them couldn't even tell the difference between the things that had actually happened and the things that they had constructed in their head.
Once the experiment ended, Loftus presented back the 5 events the students had spoken about and asked, Which of these is a fake memory? 5 out of the 24 picked a real memory as the fake memory.
If there were 3 words that I would come up with to describe what memory is, I would say memory is suggestive, it's subjective, it's malleable.
This isn't the only study Loftus conducted.
Loftus had done a bunch of work showing that she could distort people's memory or tweak people's memories by suggesting things after the event took place, suggesting things that didn't happen, and people would often incorporate that into their memory.
In one study, Loftus showed a film of a car stopping at an intersection. Some participants were asked, did another car pass the red Datsun while it was stopped at a give-way sign? This was a trick question. What the participants saw in the film was not a give-way sign, it was a stop sign. And yet, this bit of misinformation transformed people's memories. 1 week later, most participants remembered seeing the give way sign, not the stop sign. In another study, Loftus exposed 5,000 volunteers to a series of accurate news stories accompanied by photographs. She also exposed them to one fake news story accompanied by doctored photographs. One of the fabricated stories read, President Obama greeting the heads of state at a United Nations conference, shaking the hands of the Iranian president. In real life, these two people never met. Nonetheless, almost half of the participants in Slate's informal experiment who were exposed to that photo said they remembered this event. 22% recalled actually watching news footage of this handshake.
And so since then, people have done all sorts of experiments for things like where people got, these really invasive medical procedures to remembering stealing something and committing a crime.
This 2015 study followed the lost in the mall memory implantation technique. Parents of the participants provided the researchers with information about real events that happened in the participants' childhood. And then the researchers added a fictitious event. The participants were told they had committed a crime. Over multiple days, the participants were asked to repeatedly recall the crime. They were instructed to try and imagine how it might have happened, even if they couldn't immediately remember what had happened. At the end of the experiment, 25% of the participants generated rich personal memories of the crime, and another 40% believed they had committed the crime, even if they couldn't remember it in full. 4 out of 10 people believed they had committed a crime that never took place. This study helps us understand how Michelle Smith's satanic memories were constructed. Loftus's methods for memory implantation are essentially the same as those used by her therapist, Pazda. Recovered memory therapy involves repeated suggestions from a trusted individual, which in Michelle's case was her future husband. Recovered memory therapy involves visualizations of how the traumatic event could have occurred, and the occasional use of hypnosis or medication. Charan writes that recovered memory therapy is like Loftus's memory implantation recipe on steroids. It is an extremely potent way of implanting a memory, and it made Michelle Smith believe she was experiencing satanic abuse that never occurred. The Satanic Panic was a shocking period in American history. Millions were gripped by the genuine fear of the irrational. On reflection, it's easy to laugh at the believers, the law enforcement videos, the parental advice infomercial. It's easy to lament Oprah for not calling out this fraud. But if this episode has taught me anything, it's that our memory is not quite as foolproof as I hoped. Our memory is essentially imagination, and with the right amount of nudging, we can reimagine an entirely different past. For most of us, it's harmless, but for others, it's life-changing. For Michelle Smith, it obliterated her life. And perhaps the one thing that we should all remember is this can happen to anyone. If you liked this video, you'll like the Nudge podcast. On the podcast, Charan and I recorded a separate episode on the surprising truths about memory. He taught me about memory athletes, why forgetting is normal, and why you shouldn't get out your phone and record your favourite concert. That episode is only available on the audio podcast. So to listen, just search for Nudge wherever you get your podcasts.